As dawn breaks over the misty Highlands, with every stone and glen whispering ancient stories, the towering peaks and deep, mysterious lochs guard secrets of a hidden past, where history and myth intertwine. From prehistoric settlements to medieval strongholds, the land has long been a silent witness to the events that shaped the soul of the nation. This is a nation forged by nature and defined by the fierce spirit of its people, warriors, poets, and kings whose legacies endure. From the ancient Picts to the heroes of independence, Scotland's history is a tale of resilience, creativity, and immense pride. Each chapter reveals a story of courage and determination, shaped by the struggles and triumphs that have forged the character of this remarkable land. Join us on an unforgettable journey through the ages as we uncover the secrets of Scotland's mysterious past. Long before written history, Scotland was home to early human communities who carved out a life from the rugged landscape. Initially, small bands of hunter-gatherers roamed the land, leaving behind tools crafted from stone, bone, and antler. As time progressed, these early people settled, transitioning to agriculture and constructing some of Europe's most impressive ancient monuments. The Neolithic period saw the creation of massive structures, like the chambered tombs at Mysore and the standing stones of Callanish, which still inspire awe today. By the time bronzeworking arrived around 2000 BC, society had become more complex, with metal tools and weapons offering new possibilities for farming and warfare. With the Iron Age came further advancements. Iron replaced bronze as the dominant material for weapons and tools, and tribal societies emerged, marked by the construction of defensive structures like brocks and hill forts. The Picts, a confederation of tribes in the north, became known for their mysterious carvings and symbols etched into standing stones. Though the Picts left few written records, their artistic and cultural influence is clear. As the Iron Age drew to a close, Scotland stood on the cusp of recorded history, with a patchwork of tribes and kingdoms poised for the dramatic changes to come. When the Romans invaded Britain, they pushed their boundaries northward, eventually clashing with the fierce tribes of what they called Caledonia. Although Rome conquered much of southern Britain, Scotland presented unique challenges. The Romans built Hadrian's Wall in an attempt to contain the tribes to the north, but persistent resistance from the Picts led to the construction of a second boundary further north, the Antonine Wall. Despite these formidable defenses, the Picts, known for their guerrilla tactics, continually harried the Roman forces, ensuring that Rome's hold on Scotland was never secure. As the Roman Empire withdrew, the Picts reasserted their control, with their tribal confederations becoming the dominant force in the north. Meanwhile, Scots from Ireland began to settle in western Scotland, establishing the Kingdom of Alba. This migration introduced Gaelic culture and language, further complicating the political landscape. Over time, these various groups, Picts, Scots, and remnants of Roman influence, would vie for control of the land. Though the Picts dominated much of Scotland by the end of the 8th century, they would soon face new threats from Viking invaders and the eventual unification under the Scots. In the 9th century, a turning point came when Kenneth MacAlpin, King of the Scots of Dalriada, is believed to have united the Picts and Scots into a single kingdom, laying the foundations for what would become the Kingdom of Scotland. This union, often romanticized in later histories, was likely the result of both strategic marriages and military conquest. MacAlpin's reign signaled the beginning of Alba, the Gaelic name for Scotland, and cemented his dynasty's rule over the lands that stretched from the River Forth to the Highlands. However, maintaining unity in this new kingdom was no easy task. The threat of Viking raids loomed large, particularly in the Western Isles and northern coasts, where Norse settlements took root. The Scots fought off these incursions while also dealing with internal strife, as powerful noble families vied for influence. During this period, the Church played a critical role in shaping the identity of the new kingdom, with monasteries serving as centres of learning and culture. By the mid-11th century, the groundwork for a unified Scotland had been laid, even as the kingdom remained vulnerable to both external and internal pressures. With the ascension of Malcolm III in 1058, Scotland entered a new phase of consolidation and transformation. Malcolm's marriage to Margaret of Wessex, an English princess and devout Christian, brought stronger ties to England and introduced Norman customs to the Scottish court. Norman knights, granted lands by the crown, began to reshape Scottish society by introducing feudalism and building castles that would come to symbolize the power of the nobility. During the reign of Malcolm's grandson, David I, the kingdom saw a period of rapid growth and modernization. David encouraged the foundation of towns, known as burghs, fostered trade, and reformed the Scottish Church, bringing it into alignment with the wider Roman Catholic world. Under his rule, monastic orders such as the Cistercians flourished, and the kingdom's infrastructure expanded, particularly in the lowlands. Despite these advances, Scotland's independence was frequently tested by England. Tensions would rise in the latter half of the 13th century, particularly after the untimely death of Alexander III in 1286, which left no clear heir to the throne. This succession crisis would spark one of the most defining conflicts in Scottish history, the Wars of Independence. The death of Alexander III without a male heir plunged Scotland into a period of uncertainty and conflict. With no clear successor, multiple claimants vied for the throne, prompting Edward I of England to assert his claim of overlordship over Scotland. What followed was a protracted and brutal series of wars that would define the Scottish national identity for generations. William Wallace, a relatively unknown minor noble, became one of the most famous figures of the period after leading a rebellion against English forces. His victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297 made him a national hero, but his subsequent defeat and execution did little to quell the Scottish desire for independence. Robert the Bruce, after a series of shifting allegiances, crowned himself king in 1306 and led a renewed campaign against English rule. His victory at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 proved decisive, securing Bruce's throne and effectively ending English attempts to control Scotland. Although Scotland's independence was eventually recognized by the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328, peace was short-lived. Internal strife and continued English ambitions kept the nation on a war footing, but the determination of the Scots to maintain their sovereignty laid the groundwork for the rise of the Stewart dynasty in 1371. With the ascent of the Stuarts to the Scottish throne, a new era of both stability and conflict emerged. Robert II, the first Stuart king, sought to consolidate the gains made by his predecessors and restore order to a kingdom still reeling from years of warfare. Over the next century, the Stuarts would face both internal challenges from rebellious nobles and external threats from England. James IV, one of Scotland's most dynamic monarchs, brought a period of relative peace and prosperity to Scotland. His court was a centre of Renaissance learning and culture, and under his reign, Scotland experienced a flourishing of the arts, literature, and architecture. James IV also strengthened ties with France, Scotland's traditional ally, through the Old Alliance, though his reign ended tragically with his death at the Battle of Flodden in 1513 during a disastrous campaign against England. The early 16th century, however, saw growing tensions between the crown and nobility, as well as the first signs of religious conflict. Protestantism began to spread throughout Europe, and Scotland would soon be swept up in the Reformation, which would radically reshape its political and spiritual landscape. The Reformation in Scotland began as a movement to reform the corrupt practices of the Catholic Church, but quickly turned into a revolutionary force. Inspired by the teachings of Martin Luther and John Calvin, Protestant reformers gained momentum, led by figures like John Knox, whose fiery sermons called for a complete break from Catholicism. Knox's influence helped establish Presbyterianism as the dominant form of Protestantism in Scotland. This period of religious upheaval coincided with the turbulent reign of Mary, Queen of Scots. Raised in Catholic France, Mary returned to a Scotland increasingly divided between Catholics and Protestants. Her reign was marked by intrigue, scandal, and ultimately tragedy. After a series of failed political maneuvers and personal controversies, Mary was forced to abdicate the throne in favor of her infant son, James VI, and fled to England, where she was eventually executed. By the end of the 16th century, Protestantism had taken firm hold in Scotland, and the country's relationship with its southern neighbour, England, became even more complicated with the Union of the Crowns in 1603. When James VI succeeded Elizabeth I to become James I of England, Scotland and England entered into a personal union under one monarch, though they remained separate kingdoms for the time being. James VI's ascension to the English throne in 1603 marked the beginning of a delicate balancing act between his two kingdoms. While Scotland retained its own legal system and church, the close relationship with England brought both opportunities and tensions. Religious conflicts, particularly between Presbyterians and supporters of the Anglican Church, intensified during the 17th century, leading to uprisings and political unrest. The Scottish involvement in the English Civil War further complicated matters. Many Scots sided with the parliamentarians against King Charles I, hoping to protect the autonomy of the Scottish Church. After the execution of Charles I, Oliver Cromwell's forces invaded Scotland, bringing the country briefly under English rule. However, Cromwell's death and the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 returned Scotland to relative stability, though deep religious and political divisions remained. The restoration of Charles II to the throne in 1660 was a moment of relief for many, but for Scotland, the years that followed were marked by religious and political tension. Charles II sought to impose Anglican practices on the Scottish Church, but resistance was fierce. Many Scots, particularly the Covenanters, were determined to preserve their Presbyterian faith. These defiant Presbyterians faced brutal persecution under Charles' regime, and this period became known as the Killing Time, where many Covenanters were executed or driven underground for their beliefs. After the Glorious Revolution of 1688, James VII of Scotland, or James II of England, was overthrown and replaced by the Protestant monarchs William of Orange and Mary II. In Scotland, the revolution was met with mixed reactions. While many welcomed William and Mary, a significant faction, particularly in the Highlands, remained loyal to the deposed James, sparking a series of uprisings in support of the exiled king. These Jacobite supporters would continue to play a critical role in Scottish history for decades to come. Despite the political turmoil, the late 17th century also saw economic and social developments, though many Scots were divided over their country's relationship with England. By 1707, the contentious decision was made to unite Scotland and England under a single parliament. The Act of Union, though beneficial to some, was seen as a betrayal by many Scots, particularly those who felt their independence had been sold for economic gain. The effects of the Union would resonate through Scottish society for centuries. The early years following the 1707 Act of Union were challenging for Scotland. The dissolution of the Scottish Parliament and economic hardships led to widespread dissatisfaction, particularly in the Highlands and among the Jacobite supporters of the exiled Stewart monarchy. The Jacobite risings of 1715 and 1745, led by James Francis Edward Stewart and later his son Charles Edward Stewart, or Bonnie Prince Charlie, were attempts to reclaim the throne. Although the Jacobites initially gained significant support, particularly in the Highlands, both risings were ultimately crushed culminating in the defeat at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. Culloden marked the end of Jacobite hopes and led to brutal reprisals against the Highland clans, including the dismantling of the traditional clan system. Despite these conflicts, the 18th century also saw Scotland become a hub of intellectual and cultural activity. The Scottish Enlightenment was one of the most remarkable periods in European history, with figures like philosopher David Hume, economist Adam Smith, and engineer James Watt leading the way in fields as diverse as philosophy, economics, and science. The universities of Edinburgh and Glasgow became renowned centres of learning, where revolutionary ideas were debated and developed. At the same time, Scotland's economy began to shift dramatically as the Industrial Revolution took hold. Glasgow, in particular, grew into a major industrial centre, known for its shipbuilding and trade. By the early 19th century, Scotland was becoming an integral part of the rapidly expanding British Empire, contributing not only to intellectual life, but also to economic growth on a worldwide scale. The 19th century saw Scotland transformed by industrialisation, as factories and shipyards sprang up across the lowlands, particularly in cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh. Scotland became known as a centre of innovation and production. Glasgow earned the title Second City of the Empire for its role in shipbuilding and trade, and the booming industry led to the rise of a new urban working class. Railways and canals linked Scotland's cities to the rest of Britain, and Scottish goods, particularly textiles, steel, and ships, were exported across the world. However, this period was also marked by profound social and economic upheaval, particularly in the Highlands. The Highland clearances, beginning in the late 18th century and continuing through much of the 19th century, were one of the darkest chapters in Scottish history. Landowners, seeking to increase profits through sheep farming, forcibly evicted thousands of Highland tenants from their homes, destroying entire communities and cultures in the process. Many of those displaced by the clearances emigrated to Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, where they sought new lives, but carried with them a deep sense of loss and dislocation. While industrialization brought prosperity to some, it also led to overcrowded cities, poor working conditions, and economic inequality. Social reform movements gained momentum in the latter half of the century, as workers began organizing to demand better wages and working conditions. By the end of the 19th century, Scotland had become a nation of contrasts, one of great industrial power and wealth, yet also one where deep social division were becoming more apparent. The early 20th century brought new challenges to Scotland, as the country, like the rest of Britain, was drawn into two devastating world wars. During the First World War, tens of thousands of Scots fought and died on the battlefields of Europe, while those on the home front contributed to the war effort through industry, agriculture, and munitions work. The war had a profound impact on Scottish society, as the loss of so many young men, and the economic strain of the conflict took a heavy toll. The interwar years were marked by economic difficulties, particularly in Scotland's traditional industries of shipbuilding, coal mining, and steel production. The Great Depression of the 1930s led to widespread unemployment and poverty, and many Scots emigrated in search of better opportunities. However, there were also moments of hope and progress during this period. The introduction of new social welfare programs and reforms offered the promise of a more just and equitable society. Scotland again played a vital role in the Second World War, both in terms of military contribution and industrial production. Scottish soldiers fought in some of the war's most important battles, from the North African Campaign to D-Day, while cities like Glasgow became key centres for shipbuilding and munitions. However, the war also brought destruction, with cities like Clydebank suffering devastating air raids. By the end of the conflict, Scotland was left scarred but resilient, ready to face the challenges of the post-war world. The end of the Second World War ushered in a period of significant social and economic change for Scotland. Like the rest of Britain, Scotland benefited from the creation of the welfare state, which brought new housing, healthcare and education services to the population. The post-war government's ambitious reforms transformed the lives of many Scots, providing a safety net that had been lacking in previous generations. However, the optimism of the immediate post-war years soon gave way to new challenges. Scotland's traditional industries, shipbuilding, coal mining and steel production, began to decline, leading to widespread unemployment and economic hardship in many parts of the country. Cities that had once been industrial powerhouses like Glasgow found themselves grappling with the effects of deindustrialization, and many communities struggled to adapt to the new economic reality. During this period, Scotland also saw a cultural revival, as writers, artists and musicians sought to rediscover and celebrate Scottish identity. The works of figures like poet Hugh MacDiarmid and novelist Neil Gunn helped to foster a renewed sense of pride in Scotland's cultural heritage. At the same time, political movements calling for greater autonomy began to gain traction. The Scottish National Party, SNP, emerged as a significant force, campaigning for devolution and, eventually, independence. By the late 1970s, the question of Scotland's political future was increasingly coming to the forefront of public debate. The late 20th century was a period of political upheaval and change in Scotland, as the country grappled with its place within the United Kingdom. The election of Margaret Thatcher in 1979 marked the beginning of a new era of economic liberalism and deregulation in Britain. But many of Thatcher's policies were deeply unpopular in Scotland. The closure of mines, factories and shipyards during the 1980s led to widespread protests, and Scotland's economic woes deepened. At the same time, calls for Scottish autonomy grew louder. Although a referendum on devolution in 1979 had failed to gain the necessary majority, the SNP continued to advocate for greater self-governance. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the movement for devolution gained momentum, particularly as dissatisfaction with Westminster politics increased. In 1997, after years of campaigning, Scotland voted overwhelmingly in favour of devolution, leading to the creation of the Scottish Parliament in 1999. This new institution gave Scots a greater say in their own affairs, particularly in areas like health, education and justice. The establishment of the Parliament marked a new chapter in Scotland's history, as the country began to chart a path toward greater autonomy within the framework of the United Kingdom. The creation of the Scottish Parliament in 1999 was a landmark moment in Scotland's political history, but the debate over Scotland's future within the United Kingdom was far from over. In the early 21st century, the SNP grew in strength, winning a historic majority in the Scottish Parliament in 2011 under the leadership of Alex Salmond. This victory paved the way for the 2014 independence referendum, where Scots were asked whether they wanted to leave the United Kingdom and become an independent nation. Although the referendum resulted in a no vote, with 55% of Scots choosing to remain in the UK, the issue of independence did not fade. The Brexit referendum in 2016, in which Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, reignited the debate, as many Scots felt that their voices were not being heard in the broader UK political landscape. Today, Scotland continues to grapple with questions of identity, autonomy, and its place in the world. The independence movement remains strong, and the possibility of a second referendum looms large on the horizon. At the same time, Scotland is carving out its own path in areas like renewable energy, culture, and innovation. As the nation moves forward, the story of Scotland remains one of resilience, creativity, and a determination to shape its own destiny. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more fascinating journeys through time and untold history.